mute.
Okay. Was du Fragen hast? If you have any questions. Okay. So this is the Ember version of the adder. Looks exactly like the old one. Sign in, then you load stuff, and so dynamically loaded is the information about all of the plugins together and where they are, as well as this time, which is the name of the app. And protected in the item attached to the request to get that. And since you get the bearer token back with the login, that all works wonderfully. This is currently connecting to a Hoodie app which is running over here. And this is the plugin data coming from there. So I've just got a normal Hoodie app started with Hoodie start. It's just running in a terminal tab somewhere, and this is its API output for the plugins API. And to be able to talk to it from Ember is actually fairly simple. Connect configuration, all you do is, do I still have it somewhere? No, of course I don't. Okay, let's just start the server again so you can see it. All you need to do is start the Ember server with a proxy to that server. So this is the same URL as over here in the Hoodie app, the www URL, the normal web front end. Yeah, you just tell Ember to proxy that in, and when you start the server, it'll be able to talk to the Hoodie app, which is really, really nice and saves about, I don't know, 50 lines of config. That's pretty fantastic. So you can log out, and when you're logged out, you can't go back. Okay, maybe I should reload the page first before I do that kind of thing. But yeah, you can't go back. Then you can enter some rubbish. That won't work. You enter the right password, and you go right into the path that you were trying to go to in the first place. All this work. So everything in Ember starts with app.js, and in app.js, everything is boilerplate except importing Hoodie admin and setting it to the global window because the plugins need it. That's how they get their Hoodie admin, is from the window variable. This stumped me for quite a while because I wasn't sure how to import Hoodie and Hoodie admin in a way that they would work, but then I found an Ember CLI extension, or rather Hipster Brown found an Ember CLI extension that lets you load modules over NPM, and then they magically just function. All you do is prefix NPM : in front of the NPM package name, and then magically everything suddenly works. And these are the only two lines that I changed in this file. The rest is the boilerplate. Okay, the more interesting bit is actually the router, which is here. This also does nothing particularly interesting, except it defines a login route, a logout route, the plugins route, which is at plugins, and then underneath that, the individual plugin route, which is at whatever the plugin's ID is. Also not very spectacular. What's interesting, though, up here is how location is handled. And this also stumped me for a second. So config location type is imported from config environment, which is down here, which is just a config file where all the environment variables are set. And location type, by default, it's set to something else. I've forgotten what it is. But if you have it set to something else, the URLs in the app will not use a hash. They'll just work like, regular URLs. The problem is that the iframes in the app won't work anymore then, because the iframe path is part of the Hoodie API, which in turn, because it's proxied here, is under the same root as the actual app. And then Ember will think that this should be a normal app root and looks for an app root but doesn't find one. So That took me quite a while to figure out. So anyway, the location type has to be hash, and then Ember stops caring about what the actual routes are, and they just end up working, which is pretty nice. Anyway, back to the routes, to the router. The rest is fairly self-explanatory. We only have 4 routes. Let's check the login route first. Let me just tidy up here. There's too much stuff. Yeah, okay. Login route is super simple. All it does is call the login controller. And this is where quite a lot of stuff happens. So first of all, we set some properties. So the username is always admin, or the admin user, which makes sense. And the interesting thing at the bottom is the login action. The login action is called from the template. So if I submit the template, you can see up here, there's an action login on submit. So whenever this form is submitted, the action login is called on the controller, which is here. It'll then get the properties username and password, which are also defined in the template. So can't actually see it. Where is it? Yeah, value password, and username doesn't exist. Username is just the default, which is why we set it up here, admin. And then we just try, we just see whether we're actually signed in. So if we are, we just call this helper, which I'll get to in a second. If we're not signed in, hoodie admin, we do hoodie admin account signed in. If it succeeds, we go to the same helper. If it fails, we show an error message. Again, this controller sets self-set error message, which is then shown in the template as well. So as soon as error message is set, this will be visible, and you can see an error message, which I just did a couple of seconds ago. So go to route is a fairly simple helper. All it does is it first of all calls another helper that sets the bearer token, which isn't interesting for now. But what it does is it checks out which transition was attempted before this login controller got called. And we'll get back to that in a second. So Ember automatically knows where you originally wanted to go in this case. And if there is an attempted transition, we just retry that transition. And then after you succeeded to log in, you'll get routed back to where you wanted to go originally before the app determined that you weren't allowed to see that route. If, on the other hand, there was not an attempted transition, it'll just go to the plugins page. Right, and now to the bearer token. So if there is a bearer token, you can just do some AJAX setup with Ember jQuery and set an authorization header with the bearer token inside. And that's basically it. From then on, every AJAX request done through Ember will use the bearer token, which means all of them will automatically succeed if they try to access a protected resource on the hoodie API. And if for some reason the bearer token isn't there, we just go back to login. So the user can log in again. And that's basically the entire admin flow. There's also a log out page, which is terribly simple. Oops, where is it? All it does is call the logout controller, and the logout controller does nothing except sign out of hoodie admin account, which is really simple. So that's all that sorted then. Right. So if you want to display some plugins, the plugins route gets called. Now, as you'll see, this doesn't extend the regular route in Ember, but the authenticated route, which is something special. The authenticated route uses the before model hook to quickly check whether you're signed into the hoodie admin account. So before the actual route loads its model, this will check, am I even allowed to see this route? If not, you get redirected to login. If you are allowed, nothing happens. And that's basically all that this does. So plugins now goes ahead, and it sets up 2 get JSON requests. And the first one is actually a protected one. So API app config is only accessible if you're authenticated with the bearer token. And from there, we just get the config data from the couch. I can just show that so you know what I'm talking about. So this is oh, I'm signed in. Fantastic. It's basically this config object, which has the app name in it, which is something we want for later. So that happens here. So this is a bit untypical. Usually you load one, but in this case we want to load two. We want to load this config data, and we want to load the list of plugins, which happens here. And now one of the main problems you'll have with Ember, so I found everything really, really easy except this. Ember has a really strict note of what it thinks so it expects, first of all, every object to have an ID, which our API doesn't. As you can see, if I go back here, you can see what the API returns. It returns the second is that every JSON object returned has a base object. So what we get back here is basically just an array. What Ember would want is an object with a key called plugins, which has this array. So that's basically all we do here. We just wrap an object and the plugins key around it. Then we define those two as promises, call RSVP with that hash, and when the data gets returned, Ember will automatically render out the template, which looks like this. And the interesting part for now is that on the one hand, we're accessing the config object in this model we just got back. In that, there's another config object, which is a bit pointless, but that's how it is. And in there is the app name you just saw in the couch backend. The other object in the model is the plugins object, which again has a plugins key, which is not the cleanest thing in the world, but for now it works. And all we do is iterate through this with a handlebar helper. Now, interesting again about Ember is if you want URLs to work properly, in links, you use the link to helper, which then takes a route and a model. So in this case, we say we want the plugin route under plugins, and we pass in this specific model that we just looped through. You can also use link to just with a route, like up here. And yeah, that'll just go there without passing in a model. Also interesting is, oh, this shouldn't actually be here, is the concept of outlets. So every template has an outlet, which means that's where everything inside gets rendered to. So the application template just has this outlet, which it renders the plugin template into, which in turn has an outlet, which it renders the plugins template into. And this is really cool because it's simply defined by what's in the router. And where everything is just defined by the structure of the templates folder. And this is fantastically convenient because it allows you to really, really easily nest views, which was really annoying in Backbone and Marionette. So that's super easy. So I'll have to take a break for a second. Okay. Right. I hope we can cut that out later. So while we're looking at the plugins handlebars with the outlet that will later include the plugin handlebars template, let's take a look at that. And this is really, really simple. All it is an iframe element, which is basically static except for this one tiny bit here in the path, which is defined by the plugin's ID, aka its name. And this is where the Hoodie API puts the actual index file of the plugin's backend. So this is just a convention that we follow here. I can just show you how that looks in here. So sign in again. And this is the list. This each helper. This is the config subline, and this is the iframe. This whole big thing here. Yeah, I think that's actually mostly it for now as far as the structure of the app goes. I haven't used any components. I haven't used any helpers. This is all pretty simple and straightforward so far, and just magically works. The only other interesting thing in the route is in the plugin route, we want to be able to fetch an individual model, like an individual plugin. So there's one more thing we're doing here. We're actually checking against the plugin ID parameter from the URL, which plugin we should specifically load into the iframe. You have to do this explicitly in here as well, because you kind of always have to test every Ember app in two ways, either by clicking on a route, because it behaves differently when you click on a route and you're coming from the parent route, like plugins, for example, than if you reload directly in this route. So here we have the login in between, but anyway, these behave differently. So you always have to make sure that on the one hand, all the data you fetch in the parent model is correct, but all the data you fetch in the child model also has to be complete in that it can render its own template out. We could continue this tomorrow, and then I can talk about HTTP mocking, and yeah, that's about the only other interesting thing I did. I think this is actually basically it. Yep.
All right, it's a wrap. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, I'll just stop the broadcast and we'll come back to this later.